Hey folks, how you doing? Happy Sunday. And yeah, once again, coming to you live from northern Israel to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in Syria, just to the north of here, north and east, and the current goings on, the apparent overthrow of the Assad regime after some 50 years or so of being in power, right? The current dictator, Bashar Assad, having been there from like 2000 till 2024. And his father was there from the early 70s until 2000 when he passed away. And he, of course, himself had taken power in a memorable way. What can you say about good old-fashioned dictatorial regimes? They tend to be pretty bloody. And Syria happens to have a storied history with people ruling over them for decades at a time in brutal ways. And it is unfortunate that it's come to this. But that is where we are at. Syria, which has a very long and rich tradition and history in terms of being an area of the world of great interest to many empires in the past. It was a significant player for centuries in the history of the Middle East. Many more than centuries, eons, you could even say. And it was really only once the Assad regime, under the support of the Soviet Union, took power, that it became this kind of neo-Marxist colonial, satellite state of the Soviet Union, that their economy kind of went to heck. Not that it was amazing before, but it was certainly better in many ways than under the Assad regime, which kind of was this weird blend of like they were pro-capitalist or pro-capitalist in some ways, but they were very anti-capitalist in other ways. Really had a lot to do with political favoritism because, of course, I think dictatorships usually do. Whoever was favored by the dictator could do whatever they wanted. Whoever was not, was alive at his mercy, basically. So it should really come as no surprise to anyone observing the current situation that it's not just the political volatility happening, but a lot of that political volatility is also spurred on by the economic instability of Syria, which already has a wrecked economy. I mean, the average person there makes like $1,000 a year, and it's been that way for a long time. And when you consider the purchasing power of the dollar has been cut in half just over the last, less than a decade, like 7 years, it does not go a long way, right? And you got to remember the vast, overwhelming majority of the Syrian people did not like the Assad regime. I'm talking, maybe 90%, maybe 95%, who knows, maybe 70%, whatever the number is, doesn't matter. The vast majority of people in Syria were not fans of Bashar Assad, right? And the waning years of his dictatorship, right? Certainly once the Civil War broke out in 2011, they were no longer great fans, most of them. What is this going to? Oh yeah, that's the little cow shed. Well, so, what will happen now to the economic system in Syria? if these Islamists take over and don't necessarily have a proper mechanism for governing politics and the economy, and obviously the military and all that. So the hope is that they do, but the reality is, it's not so easy to just take over a country and start to manage it, especially when the group taking over are a bunch of ragtag individuals who may or may not have the experience necessary and the knowledge necessary to actually do the job right. And you can point to the Taliban in Afghanistan and say, well, they're still a country, they're still operating, and they're run by the Taliban. Everyone said what a disaster it would be. Yeah, and it is a disaster. And all these years after the U.S. has left Afghanistan, do you know who provides more aid to Afghanistan than anyone? Financial aid to the Taliban directly. The United States, right? Provides billions of dollars in aid to the Taliban. Now, again, is that worth the price of stability relatively? To make sure that their people don't all starve to death? And whatever? The calculation has been made, yes. And is $2 billion a lot of money in today's economy in a world where the U.S. has 33, 34, 35, 36 trillion dollars in debt and counting? Where every individual owes $200,000 in debt? What's another couple billion? It's like $2 per citizen, maybe $4 per citizen. It's not a lot to maintain Afghanistan relatively in a stable way. Does that mean it was good to leave Afghanistan in the hands of the Taliban? No, obviously not. It means that the U.S., which had every opportunity to win decisively in that war and to radically change that country, failed to do so miserably, partly because of the corruption and the infighting between the tribal leaders of the Afghan, groups, tribes, whatever, and partly because the U.S. did not have a well-constructed plan for the day after the military victory over the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And the same thing can be said about Iraq. That is why both of those countries are basket cases right now. It's not because the neocons were wrong to want to see changes in those areas. It's not because Bush was wrong to help, overthrow the leaders of those countries. It's because they didn't have a good plan for the day after. That's why. Anyway, there you have it. Catch up. Hello there. Hi. So, if you want, you can join me here for a moment in a little shop as I prepare to do a tiny amount of some shopping. Basic stuff. Yeah, okay. Why not? Okay, that's not gonna help. One. Oh, wow, look at all this fresh stuff they got. Hello. Lots of bananas. Who doesn't like bananas? Apparently Justin's son, by the way, ate the $6 million banana. But as I said before, he did it with great fanfare, of course, in the Justin Sun way, with the media attending and eating up his eating of the banana, which was just a good old-fashioned PR nonsense. But why was it interesting? Well, it was interesting because by eating the banana, he actually didn't do any damage to the artwork. And the artwork is like finishing up here. Böyle. Kamat mükemmel. Açıktan cevabı. Kamat mükemmel. Çalış. Done. Çalış. Tony. I think you're right.
Herhalde şu likunan makirini.
בדיוק מה שאמרת.
יהיה לכם
מזומן.
114.
יש לך הרבה סבלנים, מחזור, עובדים, הרבה אנשים, כולם עושים הכל, לא צריך לעבוד קשה, לא לשבת בקופה.
רק להשגיח.
מה אכפת לך?
לא, אני אומרת, רק
זה
להשגיח.
יותר טוב מזה, ומבקש את העלה של 4. אבל אם את רוצה אל תקים.
תודה.
אבל אם את רוצה מגיעים? אל תקים גם.
תודה.
כן, אני יודעת.
Well, folks, so that little delay there, I don't know how many of you folks managed to catch any of that, but there was some very interesting information in there. We'll see how it goes. Let me see. What kind of juice is this man making? Let's see if we get a fresh juice. נשמע. כמה זה כוס של מיץ? זה מיץ פה?
אין כוסות, יש רק בקבוקים.
הבנתי שזה כזה, קופסאות כאלה?
שתי קופסאות?
הבנתי, תודה להתראות. No pomegranate juice. The guy's not making juice out of those pomegranate seeds. He's just boxing them up. Literally opens the pomegranates, pulls all the seeds out. There's typically around 638 seeds in the pomegranate. I think that's the number, 638, 618, something like that, 638, whatever. It's apparently the same number as the number of mitzvahs in the Torah. Of course, not every pomegranate has that exact number. Some have more, some have less, but a lot do have that exact number. And so, of course, mystics or symbolic interpreters or people who look for patterns will say, aha, that is why. There's another reason why the pomegranate is a very important symbolic fruit for the Jewish people, because it reminds us of how many mitzvahs there are in the Torah, which, you know, I don't know if you need to make a big deal out of it, but I don't know if everybody does, but it is a random coincidence. Again, obviously not with every single pomegranate, but the large majority of them, you know, a fully grown, ripe, healthy pomegranate usually will have that number. Which is just an interesting coincidence, obviously, because every year Jewish people celebrate the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. You know, usually, traditionally, they'll have some pomegranate as part of the ritual festivities and celebrations, and so that fruit comes up quite commonly in the Jewish tradition. Anyway, back to the Assad situation. What exactly is happening, right? Well, like I said, you know, if we see the geopolitical and geoeconomical situation remains relatively stable, which again is a very crazy word to use in an area as volatile as the Middle East these days, but if it remains relatively on par with how it was before this relatively quick overthrow of the Assad regime, then it will probably play out, at least temporarily, without too much additional shockwaves in that sense. But keep in mind, first of all, as of yet, at least the last half hour, that I've seen, there is no confirmation that Assad is actually gone. There are lots of reports that say he's already fled the country. There were reports last night showing that his plane had left and flown to Abu Dhabi. There are other there are other plane records that show he probably fled to Russia already. There's actually no confirmation, at least that I know of, that say he's already fled. And nothing's confirmed. So he may still actually be in Syria, but he's not in the palace, probably because the people have been in the palace already, along with the rebel soldiers who took over the place. And there's plenty of videos of thousands of people walking through Assad's palace in Damascus with their video phones recording everything and, videotaping all the opulence and the wealth that he had grown accustomed to, having grown up like that literally his entire life, right? Since his father was dictator himself for decades before. And Bashar Assad took power as a relatively young man, so he had spent his entire childhood and young adulthood and early adult years living in the lap of luxury as a dictator's son and the heir apparent, which he became, right? So for decades and decades and decades, and with the assistance of Russian money and Iranian money, the Syrian dictator lived a very comfortable life and oppressed the living daylights out of his own people. And again, was responsible for the death. He killed at least 500,000 people during the civil war, during his tenure. His father also killed many thousands of Syrian civilians in, when they tried to have an uprising against him. He was a brutal dictator, just like his son. And his son was actually turned out to kill a lot more Syrians than his own father did. So to suggest that somehow the Assad regime will be missed, not by me, but obviously there are many people who will miss him and his regime because they thought, he was defending the Alawites from, outside forces that didn't like Syria and this and that. Well, listen, a lot of the rebel forces that overthrew his power, are from Syria. They've been from Syria for generations, unlike the Iranian and Hezbollah and Russian forces that were meddling in Syria, who are all not from Syria, obviously, and who were all interfering in Syrian politics and not letting the people of Syria rule themselves. So, you can look at this and say, well, if the Syrians, Battle of Long Island, I don't know what that is, one of the bloodiest battles of the war in the States. Okay, well, I'm talking about Syria. Right now, Syria, has been overrun. Its government, has been overrun by Syrians who don't approve of the way Bashar Assad was running his dictatorship. But they also have very extreme views about how things should be done. So, yeah, they got rid of a brutal dictator, an awful brutal dictator, who murdered 500,000 of his own people. It's hard to express that in words without, he killed 500,000 of his own people just to stay in power. And you could say, well, they were a different religion, blah, blah, blah. First of all, he was a secular Alawite. He's a secular Alawite. Right? Bashar Assad and his family, secular Alawites. So religion, to him was just, like it was to Saddam Hussein, was just a tool to be exploited. The religious ones that have taken over and the secular ones that have joined them in the fight, they want they want an Islamic caliphate, even including the secular ones who are not religious. They still prefer having an Islamic caliphate burgeoning, starting in Syria, rather than having a secular Alawite government. So it's not about the religion, right? In some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. To the Islamists, it obviously is. Right? They see this as a holy war, and the U.S. and Israel, view that as a potentially very destabilizing thing. But again, there are accusations, or there are claims, or conspiracy theories, or whatever you want to call them, that say that the U.S. has been funding these rebels. We know that Turkey has been, obviously. Some of the rebels have been funded. Am I Syrian? Well, I mean, no, I'm not directly Syrian, although I have some roots a few generations back. So yeah, I mean, I'm the descendant of the descendant of the descendant of some Syrian Jews on one side of my family, who were actually from Aleppo, of all places, and they escaped Syria. And I say escaped because it was not good to be Jewish when they had to leave. It was very dangerous. Like it was, when I say it was not good, I mean for their own safety. They had to leave. Or rather, it was economically wise for them and politically astute of them to read the map and to understand that within the coming decades, it would not be a good idea to stay. So they left early. But still, there were bad things happening to Jews across the Middle East by the time they left. And they went to Egypt, of all places, which at the time, under the king, was actually still a very friendly place for Jewish people to grow up and to live. And that's what they did. On one side of my family. On the other side of my family, it's a different story. But yeah, so there's Syrian, and I have Syrian and Egyptian and other many things. I'm a mix. I'm what we call in the Jewish tradition the wandering Jew. My family has been wandering around for a very long time on different places on the earth because of the changes and upheavals in countries and cultures and all this stuff, both on the Sephardi side and the Ashkenazi side. So yeah, we have a very mixed bag of cultures and nationalities in my family. But yeah, there is some Syrian blood in there. In fact, definitely. In fact, that is where the progenitor of the family name is traced back to, on the one side, and also where the name of my father and one of his cousins, and there were actually there were like 7 cousins who had the same name in honor and respect of their forefather who had that name several generations before them, or 2 generations before them. It was like their great-grandfather or something, or great-great-grandfather. And yeah, so there's that too. So we do have a Syrian connection in that sense as well. So yes, the name Harari is a Jewish name, but it is definitely a name that goes back to Syria for many generations. And but yeah, I am not there. I've never been there officially. I may or may not have unofficially. I just have some, ancestors who were. That had nothing to do with my viewpoint about what is happening right now in Syria and what risks the people in Syria face, especially those who are not of the particular version of religion that the incoming powers that be who are Islamic militant extremists, have said that they are. Excuse me. So do I expect it to be all love and roses and picnics in Syria from now on? No, definitely not. Yes, Syria has fallen already by all accounts. Now, here's the thing. Has Syria fallen? Well, look, when Bashar Assad was first threatened, did he just back down? No, he used all the forces at his disposal and wiped out 500,000 of his own citizens to stay in power. So unless he's already fled the country because he's read the geopolitical map and he realizes there's no way he can win this time, there is every possibility that he's still in the country and is preparing for a fight. You know, he's still... Now, his army, his headquarters of his army, have said it's over, and they've told their officers the regime has fallen, and it's over. Okay, well, what if he happens to have legions of loyalists who are extremely well armed and may still have access to, like, airplanes and pilots? When I say they're extremely well armed, I mean for a dictatorial regime, obviously, not for, like, they're not extremely well armed compared to Israel or something like that. But they are extremely well armed, and they can certainly do a lot of damage, and they can certainly put up a hell of a fight if they want to. So far, they haven't. So far, all indications are that they have fallen without a fight, without much of a fight. You know, like, the rebels literally were within something like 6 kilometers, 20 hours ago, 6 kilometers of Damascus. And they literally just rolled in to Damascus overnight, took control immediately without, barely a fight. And this morning, Damascus time, they were already in control of, like, the palace. So this isn't exactly the battle in Damascus situation, like, at all. This is the antithesis of that. And for anybody who's looking for a big showdown, well, you've got a bit of an anticlimactic ending there, because it looks like, for now, Assad has just simply been overthrown and has fled the country and is ousted from power. But we'll see. Time will tell. But there's no point in armchair generaling the situation too much. Just be aware of the reality and understand that this is not necessarily a great thing. As good as it is that Assad is out of power, I don't want total chaos to reign supreme in Syria. I would very much like the Syrians to have a stable and peaceful and prosperous government whose aim is to help the people and to help them thrive politically and economically and culturally. And to do that by living side by side in peace and prosperity with all of their neighbors, including Israel and Lebanon and Iraq and Turkey and, Jordan. Is that going to happen? I ain't waiting up nights, as the old saying goes. Not counting on it. But anyway, for now, of course, there will be some joy and happiness in Damascus and the surrounding areas and Syria in general by the people who are glad to see the Assad regime go. And that's great, wonderful. They'll be jubilant, ebullient. But at the same time, again, only time will tell what will come of it. Is this going to be good for the Syrian people or not? Is it going to be good for the region or not? Is it going to be good for the world or not? Only time will tell. So, with that said, and what is in fact the latest now that I am here. Yeah, again, there's more reporting of the rebels declaring Damascus captured and an end to the Assad family rule. Syrian rebels take areas near the Israeli border. The IDF has warned them not to turn in the direction of Israel. And there are no plans by Israel to interfere in what's happening. Although Israel has deployed some soldiers in the buffer zone, which is that little strip of land between Israel and Syria that is usually monitored by the UN. They have some monitors there, just like they do in South Lebanon. And now there are Israeli paratroopers and commandos, apparently, in that buffer zone to make sure that the Syrian rebels don't try to do anything stupid, or that other people don't try to do it on the border with Israel. There is an Israeli minister who has said that Syria is now led by an Al-Qaeda subsidiary, which, again, they were until they broke off their relationships with them because of optics. It doesn't mean they really disagree with them. It just means that they understood that for PR, it was better to say, no, we don't have anything to do with them anymore. Okay. Now there's talk that the Yemeni, Iran-backed Houthis can also be ousted. And some Syrian rebels say they're now attacking Kurdish forces in the north. Kurdish forces that are not friendly with Turkey, for example, that the US does support, which Turkey supports against. So NATO, an ally, a member of NATO, Turkey, is supporting the forces fighting against the Kurds, and the US is supporting the Kurds fighting against those other forces. But the US is now also supposedly funding those same forces that are fighting the Kurds in order to help them overthrow Assad. It's a very musical chairs situation, and Syria needed help yes, absolutely. Syria needed help a long time ago, and it never came. That's true. That is true. And there were no calls of, there's genocide happening. Where were all the anti-Bashar Assad protests since 2011? Like crickets, man, crickets. 500,000 dead of his own people, not like of an enemy people he was fighting in a war. Not of a people that had attacked him and his people and caused, an attempted genocide against him. No, they wanted to overthrow him. They didn't want to kill every single Alawite. But now, Alawites and Christians and other people who've been protected by Syria's regime, they do honestly have legitimate fears. And I honestly do fear for them. And I hope that everybody with half a heart can sympathize with that, whether you are connected to them in any way or not. It is honestly just absolutely awful. Like the fate of the Christians in Syria, we don't know what will happen to them, but it does not look good, right? You got to remember, the people who've taken over are led by religious extremists who want an Islamic caliphate across the Middle East. And that starts with eliminating anyone who doesn't convert to their religion and isn't granted the privilege of being a slave of one type or another. Basically, a dhimmi, a slave, a second-class citizen, a third-class citizen, a piece of property. Doesn't matter what you call it, not equal citizens. And not like they don't have the right to travel freely 100% of the time because they have to go through more checkpoints sometimes. No, like physical abuse, torture, and much worse, right? It's, like I said, Assad's regime, absolutely awful. I'm glad he's gone, yes. Not even a question, not even a doubt. What about our embassies? Thank you. Which embassies? The embassies of Syria? Exactly. What happens to the embassies of Syria now? What happens to all the diplomatic relations that Syria has? France is one of their great supporters and friends, or has been for a long time. Many countries across Europe have friendly relations with Syria. The U.S. not so much, because Syria has been involved in funding and supporting terrorism for decades. And to their credit, even countries in Europe, including France and others, have long criticized the Syrian regime for supporting terrorism and doing things like that, but not enough. But regardless, Syria has long established diplomatic relations with lots of countries around the world. What happens to all their diplomats? What happens to all their embassies? We don't know, right? These things, there are processes for doing this kind of handover, changeover thing after regimes change. But it's usually pretty chaotic, and there's usually some pretty ugly things that happen along the way. And I sense that we won't get anything very. There is, of course, an Eastern a presence of the U.S. military. Right, the U.S. military has a presence in Eastern Syria, near the border with Iraq, and they've been there for a long time now, and that is apparently going to continue. Well, try to get them out forcefully. It's, good luck. They have massive air wing support. They have all kinds of defenses at their disposal. So yes, in theory, the entire Syrian army could, I guess, overrun some bases, but the U.S. has some serious firepower there. I don't think the rebels want to engage with them for any reason. They have no reason to. At least not at the moment. The UN says that they have cautious hope that Syria is in a watershed moment, and the IDF says that the buffer zone deployment is coordinated with the United Nations and will go on until things are clear in Syria. It's at the same time, you got a war happening in Gaza with Israel. But that's still happening. Don't forget. And there's still a tenuous ceasefire happening between Israel and the Hezbollah. That's still happening too. But there was a drone attack by Israel in southern Lebanon because there was a Hezbollah reportedly who was posing a threat to Israeli troops, reportedly violating the ceasefire. The ceasefire still technically holds. Lebanese media claim 5 dead and 5 wounded in a separate Israeli airstrike. President Trump has said that the U.S. should stay out of the Syrian civil war and let it play out. Or incoming President Trump, right? President-elect Trump has said that this is not our fight, is what he said. He wrote in one of his social media posts. And there's a lot of reporters covering this guy, Golani or Jolani, or we pronounce it Golani, just like the Israelis, Golani, who is apparently being transformed by the media, right? They're whitewashing his background, and he was a radical jihadist, right? But now he's a pragmatist, they're calling him. Well, maybe he's a pragmatist because of how he took over. That doesn't mean he's not a radical jihadist. He might very well want radical jihad because that is exactly what they say they want. They want radical Islamism to govern Syria. I'm not making this up. You guys can look up the group that has taken over, and you'll see for yourself, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, right? Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So the al isn't part of the acronym, but HTS. If you look up HTS history, it's not exactly a wonderful group with a wonderful history. If you're looking for peace and prosperity and getting along, and kumbaya. Not at all that. Right? And the leader, Abu Muhammad al-Golani, leader of the Islamist Rebel Alliance, is being whitewashed. Like I said, they're painting him as some kind of a pragmatist who has changed in his years. The guy's like in his 40s, and apparently 20 years ago when he went to Iraq, he was a young and more foolish person and whatever, and he joined an extremist group, just blah blah blah. But eventually, when he came back to Syria, he saw that he didn't want that kind of destruction brought to Syria with him. So he became more of a pragmatist. Okay, he's still running a terrorist group. But, that's the situation right now. So nothing is clear, right? I would not be hoping and losing sleep for the possibility that the new leaders of Syria are somehow going to be wonderful, peaceful, and loving and humanitarian and give equal rights to everybody and live in peace and prosperity as a nation and side by side with all their neighbors. I wouldn't be losing sleep over that hope. It's very unlikely. And it's a shame, because why do the people of the Middle East need to continue to suffer at the hands of outrageous, violent gunmen, right? Violence people. It's disgusting. Personally, I'm sick of it. I wish the Middle East could lay down their stupid arms and make peace and have a peaceful region of the world, just like Europe or the United States and Canada and Mexico, relatively. I know there's cartels in Mexico. Yeah, I get it. But the U.S. and Mexico don't have wars against each other on a regular basis, right? The U.S. and Canada don't fight wars on a regular basis. There's peace and prosperity between those three nations that do massive amounts of trades. And across the entire European Union, there's massive amounts of trade. It's the biggest economic bloc of like more than 400 million people, in open democracies with free trade. So anyway, that's going to do it for now, folks. Hope you all have a great Sunday and stay peaceful. And I wish you all the best. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.